Racial justice, equality, civil rights, defund police, police brutality.
Words we hear every day. The promise of change and frustration that comes from a lack of change are with us every day.
The flurry of news stories, political movements, protests, violence in the streets is like a tornado swirling around us, clouding our thoughts and making us doubt our actions.
Today, we're going to offer a little perspective.
Something to help us know where we are in the history of the civil rights movement.
Today, in this program presented by the Children's Education Program of the Bass Hall, we'll be taking a look at the road to racial equality and justice in America. We'll be looking at it through the life of a very famous man. We'll be zooming back in time to visit with a historic figure.
You may know his name, or maybe not. But if you believe that today's surge in attention and struggles for racial justice and equality are justified, you must know about this man. He was a hero.
What was his name? We'll let you guess.
Let's start with a puzzle. We'll give you some clues. Can you guess who it is?
Clue 1. He was one of the greatest and one of the most important leaders of the civil rights movement.
Clue 2. As a lawyer, he won dozens of civil rights cases in America's courts, traveling thousands of miles and arguing in hundreds of courts for the unfairly accused.
He was a hero to the blacks in America. Thousands came to hear him in court.
Clue 3. As the head of the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP, he argued before the Supreme Court in 32 civil rights cases, and he won 29 of them. And then,
Clue 4. He was the first African American to become a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court.
that's the highest court in America's judicial branch. It's equal to the legislative branch, Congress, and the executive branch. That's the president's branch.
Does anyone know who we're talking about?
Is it Martin Luther King?
No.
Is it John Lewis?
No.
Is it Jesse Jackson? Is it Malcolm X?
No. And no.
Ugh, I give up.
No, wait, I think I know. Is it Thurgood Marshall?
Yes!
Oh man, I knew that answer.
Who?
Thurgood Marshall.
If any of you out there knew the answer, give yourself a pat on the back and thank your teachers.
We'll look at three major parts of Thurgood Marshall's career. Number 1, as a lawyer, he fought for racial injustice, defending the poor and the innocent. Number 2, as the head of NAACP, he led a national legal campaign to integrate America. Number 3, as a Supreme Court justice.
Let's meet him. Students and teachers,
We are proud to introduce Justice Thurgood Marshall.
Hello, my name is Thurgood Marshall. Thank you for having me. I hear we're going to do an interview. Well, I hope my answers are of interest to you and your audience. Could you all introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Jessica.
Hi, I'm Novin.
Hey, I'm MJ.
Hi, I'm Mallory.
Hello, I'm Preston.
Hey, my name is Zacharias.
Hi, I'm Nia.
Hi, I'm Johanna.
It's wonderful to meet you. What would you like to talk about?
Justice Marshall, would you tell us about yourself?
Well, I was born in 1908 in Baltimore, Maryland. I had one brother, Aubrey. My father earned his living as a porter or waiter on the railroad, and my mother was a teacher.
Did you grow up poor?
No, I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in an inner-city neighborhood.
Excuse me for asking, but I've never known someone named Thurgood. That's a really strange first name. Are you like Thurgood the Fourth or something?
No, I chose that name.
What?
Yes, when I was 6 years old.
No way.
You see, I was a pretty feisty kid. You could say hard-headed. And I just hated the name my parents gave me. It was too long, hard to spell, and the other kids always teased me about it.
What was your real name?
Thurgood.
Thurgood.
That is bad.
It always did get a good laugh. It was my uncle's name, but my grandpa's name was worse.
It couldn't be worse than Thorogood.
It was Thorny Good, Marshall. So, when I was 6 years old, I made my parents change my name, like do the paperwork and officially change my name to Thurgood.
So when you were young, you weren't a goody-goody?
Oh, no, I was mischievous, a troublemaker. I love to joke around and pull pranks on kids. I made many trips to the principal's office.
What kind of pranks?
Throwing water balloons was my favorite. I shouldn't tell you about the others. It might give you ideas.
In those days, children were spanked at school, right? Did you get licks from a paddle?
No, I had a great principal. Know how he punished me?
How?
He sent me to the basement for detention with a copy of the U.S. Constitution. And every time I went down there, I had to memorize a part of it. I was in trouble so often that by the time I'd graduated, I'd memorized the entire U.S. Constitution, the supreme law of the land, the preamble, 7 articles, the Bill of Rights, and all the remaining 10 amendments.
I had to memorize the preamble in school.
Well, let's hear it.
I'll try. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and,
Secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity do
ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
Good work, Joanna. Now, what do you suppose are my favorite words in the preamble?
Establish justice?
And?
Secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
Justice Marshall, I'm confused. You said the Bill of Rights plus 10 amendments, but aren't there 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights? If you add 10 more, you get a total of 20 amendments. But aren't there 27 amendments to the Constitution?
Look here, everyone. We have a history scholar. Maybe a future constitutional lawyer. Aren't you a quick one? You caught me in an error. Or did you? Here's a good puzzle for you all. Why did I say 10 amendments instead of 17 amendments? Now remember, I was a kid and it was 1924. Can anyone figure it out? Did I make an error or not?
I have it. In 1924, there were only 20 amendments.
That's correct. Would you like another puzzle?
Okay.
What was the 19th Amendment? It is a favorite for the ladies.
The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote.
Excellent.
How did you get so interested in the law?
Now that is a great question. You see, my father had the oddest hobby. Most fathers in those days liked baseball or fishing, but mine, he liked to go to the courts of law and watch the trials. Imagine that.
Why?
He just loved listening to the legal arguments. He only had an 8th grade education, but he loved hearing the lawyers try to convince the juries. And sometimes he took me along. Later at the dinner table, he would bring up the case and make me defend why I felt one way or another about it. My dad, my brother, and I had the most spirited debates you ever heard about anything. I guess we debated 5 out of 7 nights at the dinner table. He made us defend our positions with clear thinking and good facts. And all that practice made me so good at arguing my opinions that I became the captain of the debate team in high school and college.
How do you learn to be a lawyer?
Well, after you graduate from college, my college was Lincoln College, you have to go to law school for several more years to become a lawyer.
Is that what you did?
Yes. I applied to the University of Maryland Law School right there in my hometown, but they denied me admission. My mother was so hurt and upset, and I wouldn't forget it.
Couldn't get admitted. Why? Bad grades?
I bet it was because of all the pranks you pulled in school.
No. They wouldn't let me in because I was African American. It was a school for whites only. You see, when I grew up, everything in America was segregated. We could not eat in restaurants, stay in hotels, drink from water fountains that were for whites only. We could only use the facilities that were labeled for coloreds. My elementary school, my high school, my college were for coloreds only. So here I was, all excited to study law, and I couldn't even choose the school I wanted. I had to travel an hour each way to attend Howard University, a law school for coloreds.
Was it a good school?
No, not at first. They called it a dummies retreat. The standards were poor. The students only went there because they couldn't get into any other law school. The graduates couldn't get jobs. It wasn't even accredited.
Then how'd you learn to be such a good lawyer?
In my first year, the school hired a new dean, and he was great. Charles Houston, a Harvard man. Imagine that. A black man who'd graduated from Harvard. We had never met anyone like that. Well, he whipped that school into shape fast. There were 36 of us in the freshman class, but he made those classes so hard that only 5 of us graduated. He would not be satisfied with us until he went to a dance on campus and found all of his students sitting along the wall reading law books instead of partying.
How did you make it through school?
I was lucky. I needed a part-time job for money, and he gave me a job in the law library. There wasn't much to do in that job, so I read law books all day. I would pick a subject, like contract law, and read every case in contract law that I could find. I graduated at the top of the class. Then I set up my own law practice, but very soon I went to work for the NAACP. Do you young folks know what the NAACP stands for?
The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
Tell me something. What do you think is the most important word in NAACP?
Well, I think it is advancement. That means improvement, progress, making things better.
It means movement towards racial equality to me.
What kind of work did you do for the NAACP?
Well, you see, they needed lawyers who could provide free support for folks who couldn't afford a good lawyer. Many of them were innocent. Many times the trials were not fair, so they needed help. For example, Zacharias, what if you were wrongly accused of a crime you hadn't committed? You were innocent, but the jury was all white, and you couldn't afford a good lawyer. What would happen?
I would go to jail.
Or worse, maybe hanged. That was happening all over the nation, especially in the southern states. And I defended folks for 25 years. I won a lot of cases, and the ones I lost broke my heart. Wasn't long before the NAACP Legal Defense Fund made me the lead lawyer, the boss.
How could you handle all those cases?
Great question. What would you do?
I would ask for help from other lawyers.
That's exactly what I did. I found other lawyers who believed in civil rights and asked them for help. I hired some volunteered, and my team grew and grew. We handled 500 cases a year, but that wasn't the only thing we did. Charles Houston had a bigger plan, and he wanted me in on it.
What could be bigger than saving hundreds of lives a year?
Declaring war on our biggest enemies, the law that kept the black man down for 56 years, Plessy versus Ferguson and the separate but equal clause. Ever heard of it?
No.
I think I have. I think it was the Supreme Court decision about segregation, right?
Yes.
What did it say?
Plessy versus Ferguson said that segregation was just fine. It said that America should remain segregated. Now listen to this carefully. The races could remain separate as long as things were equal. It made Jim Crow a law.
Jim Crow? What's that?
Oh, I know that one. That means segregated America.
It made segregation legal under the law. Can you believe that? I get mad just thinking about it. For example, it said that white and black kids should go to separate schools as long as the schools were equal.
Were they equal?
No, nothing was equal. Opportunity, education, job pay, voting rights, you name it. The black man was discriminated against. So, Mr. Houston and I went on a long trip through the South right in the middle of the Great Depression.
Why?
To gather facts. We knew that black schools were not equal. My goodness, everybody knew that. They were shacks, unheated, filthy, poor, and overcrowded. So we traveled through the South for years, looking at schools, meeting with folks, gathering facts. With those facts, we could prove that separate is not equal. We had to change that law. You see, black parents wanted a better life for their children. Better than hard labor, low pay. And they knew that the only way to get that was to get them a good education. Our job was to get them good schools.
So it was Mr. Houston who put you on your path.
Mr. Houston taught me this. The great work of the black lawyers in this generation must be in the South. And the law schools must send their graduates there and stand squarely behind them as they wage their fight for true equality before the law.
Wow. So he said that all black lawyers should be everywhere there was injustice. He was a great role model for you.
Oh, yes, he was. And after I saw how bad things were in the South, I was raring to go. And soon, we got our first shot. Do you remember the University of Maryland Law School?
Was that the school that refused to admit you because you were black?
Yes. I was going to get even with the University of Maryland for not letting me go to its law school. So we sued them, and we won. We had cracked the color barrier. They had to integrate. I was a local hero, and my mother was very happy.
What did you do after that?
Oh my, I kept on traveling for the NAACP, fighting legal cases for over 30 years.
30 years?
Wow.
Over 30 years. I started during the depths of the Depression, about 1934, and officially ended in 1967. Traveled 30,000 miles a year.
Was it dangerous?
Oh, yes. I have lots of stories about those years.
How did you find out about the cases?
Well, I got to be pretty famous. Word spread about this black lawyer who was actually winning cases for the wrongly accused, and they asked me for help. But I was not always welcome when I came to town, so they hid me in their homes for safety. Would make me lie low to avoid the mobs and the Ku Klux Klan. But I didn't like being hidden away. I liked to get into the towns, speak at churches, community halls, and in people's homes.
You met with people in their houses?
Yes, ma'am. They wanted to meet me, so they organized meetings. You see, they needed to know about the law and their civil rights, so I taught them. And when I argued in court, they came from miles around to watch because the word had spread that I was saving lives. They had never seen a black lawyer arguing in a white man's courtroom.
Were you frightened?
One night in Tennessee, I was almost lynched. I was racing out of town after a court case, and the police pulled me over. I thought they would take me to jail, but they put me in their car and headed into the woods. I thought they would hang me for sure.
Did you escape?
Some friends saved me. Came after the car in the dark. I will admit, I was scared.
What about your team of lawyers?
When I sent my staff out, I called ahead to arrange for homes to stay in, a host to feed them, even hide them. It was a difficult time. So, you folks are in Texas. Oh, I have many memories of Texas, indeed, indeed. Of all my cases, I believe I'm most proud of a case that I fought and won in Texas. It was the first real big national case I had.
What was it about?
The right to vote. I wanted all African Americans to have the right to vote in every election, but they couldn't. Did you know that in the 1940s, an African American could not vote in a primary election in Texas?
Why?
Now listen hard and try to follow this foolishness. Since Texas was a state dominated at that time by the Democratic Party, basically all elections were decided in the primary. So if you did not vote in the primary, your vote didn't really mean very much. When blacks tried to join the Democratic Party or vote in the primary, it was decided that the Democratic Party was a private club. And guess what group could not be a member of that club? You got it. So, since African Americans were not members, they could not vote in the primaries. Isn't that a good one? Well, I argued before the Supreme Court on that one, and now wait for it. Got that rule declared unconstitutional. Once I got that done, it set a precedent for laws in all the southern states. You may applaud now. It took me 4 years of legal battles in the courts, but I finally took it down.
Excuse me, Justice Marshall. 4 years? Why did it take you so long?
Well, I started on that case in 1940, and they turned me down 4 times.
You organized 4 cases? Where did you find enough money to go to court 4 times?
You see, Preston, I traveled across Texas over and over speaking to folks. If they believed in the right to vote, I asked them for money. When I lost a case, I had to start over again.
Wow, you sure get excited when you talk about your cases.
I was famous for that. Someone once said I was like a tea kettle about to explode. Well, now maybe you'd like to hear about another battle I won in Texas.
Yes, what was it about?
Are there any Longhorns out there?
No, I'm an Aggie.
TCU for me.
Okay, fine. This case was about UT, the University of Texas. Their law school was doing the very same thing that the University of Maryland did to me back in 1935. Do you remember what that was?
They wouldn't allow you to join their law school because you were black.
That's right, Nia. It was a great law school, but it was segregated. Here we were again, another law school that wouldn't let us in. What do you think I did?
You sued them, went to court, and got UT Law open to blacks.
Right. I won that one in 1950. You know, before I was on the Supreme Court, I argued before the Supreme Court. All of them civil rights cases. I'm very proud to tell you that I argued 32 cases and I won 29 of them. Pretty good, huh? Let me ask you something. What if African American teachers are paid less than white teachers? Is that right?
No.
Well, I didn't think so either. So what did I use to fix that?
The law.
Right, the law. And I got it done. Can you imagine if blacks were still segregated from whites? Can't use the same water fountains? Eat inside the same restaurants, etc.? If y'all couldn't even sit in the same auditorium together, one show for white students and one for African American students. That's the way it was in America, until I fought it, starting in 1940 using the law. And in 1954, we won the Brown versus Board of Education case, in which the Supreme Court ended racial segregation in public schools, because until then, black students were not allowed to attend public schools with whites.
Brown versus the Board of Education. It was the biggest case of his career. Marshall had been preparing to attack Plessy, Jim Crow, in schools for 20 years. While traveling, making speeches to raise money, and fighting historical cases, it remained the plan.
The difficulty wasn't how to attack the law, what the strategy would be. How would they prove to the Supreme Court that separate but equal was in fact a violation of the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed equal protection under the law?
It had to be a win.
Marshall and Charles Houston had known for years that the key was to attack the educational system.
Teams of lawyers worked for years. In 1950, the real prep began, and Marshall had even more work. Meetings with his team, planning strategy, legal research, mock trials. He was so overworked that he said, "The good thing is I can choose which 23 hours of the day I work."
It was such a big, huge case that they planned lawsuits in 5 states, putting such pressure on the Supreme Court that they would have to decide.
2 years later, the Supreme Court was split, still undecided. They rescheduled arguments for October 1953.
A month before that, a justice on the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Vinson, an opponent of Marshall's suit, died.
A new justice was appointed in October, Earl Warren from California. Marshall now had 5 votes out of 9.
But it wasn't over yet. They had to go back to court and start over with the new justice.
Arguments began in December.
But the court would not rule for months. It was a very tense time for everyone.
On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, and therefore racial segregation of public schools violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Now, students, did you get that date? May 17th, 1954. After 56 years, Plessy was dead. The headlines read, "Segregation illegal now. The greatest victory for African Americans since the Emancipation Proclamation." We hit the jackpot. It was the greatest victory we ever had.
1954. This wasn't even the 60s yet.
The 60s civil rights movement started because of this decision. It laid the groundwork.
Is that when they integrated the schools?
Well, you remember that change is slow, right? 3 years later, in 1957, there I was, fighting on the front lines for the desegregation of Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. Arkansas's Governor Faubus even stood in front of the school, refusing to admit 7 African Americans, and they had to send in the federal troops to protect the students.
Tell us what happened next, in the 60s.
Did you meet Dr. Martin Luther King?
Yes, I knew him indeed. And oh my, wasn't it a marvelous thing he did for the civil rights movement? Just great. I've been leading the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for years when the civil rights movement of the 60s started, and it was great to have so many people join the fight. but my place was in the courts. I was busy with legal cases. Do you see how Dr. King and I had different jobs in the civil rights movement? His way was through speaking and protest. My way to fight in the courts, using the law to change laws.
Well, which way do you think is better? Through protests or legal battles?
During my life, there were many mass protests in Tennessee, Harlem, Detroit, and of course Tulsa, that ended up in death and the destruction of black neighborhoods. I believe that organized black resistance led to a white backlash, wholesale slaughter with no good achieved. So I shied away from protest. I preferred the legal path. Dr. King succeeded in his protests because he insisted that they were nonviolent protests. I guess if you look at Rosa Parks and the bus case, you could argue that it took both of us. Different paths, but working for the same cause. The 60s. All very tumultuous. Selma March, assassinations of President Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Reverend King, the Watts riots. A long, sad list. Well, let's talk about Texas again.
Why?
Well, Mallory, there's something you Texas youngsters should know and be proud of. It was a Texan who put me on the Supreme Court. He did more for racial justice than just about any other president, except for Abe Lincoln, of course.
Oh, I know. President Johnson.
That's right. He got the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed.
I know these. These eliminated racial discrimination in employment, protected voters, stopped segregation in all places, not just schools, and protected peaceful protesters.
They were big, important acts for the civil rights movement. But he wasn't done yet.
What was next?
He vowed to put the first African American on the Supreme Court. Woo, was that a battle? Everybody fought him on that one, especially the Dixiecrats. That's what they called Southern Democrats. But President Johnson, a Democrat, was very persuasive and determined. You know, when he shook your hand, he would grab your elbow at the same time. And they used to say that he wouldn't let go until you agreed to what he wanted.
So he got it done? The first African American on the Supreme Court?
That was you, right?
Yes. He said, I want to finish this thing that Abraham Lincoln started.
Thanks for talking to us today, Justice Marshall.
Thank you, Justice Marshall.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Thurgood Marshall would go on to serve 24 years on the Supreme Court.
He continued to defend the poor, the innocent, and the oppressed with his Supreme Court opinions. He's remembered especially for his opinions on civil rights, criminal procedure, and his opposition to the death penalty.
Justice Marshall retired in 1991 at age 83 and passed away in 1993 at the age of 84.
I wish I could say that racism and prejudice were only distant memories. We must dissent from the indifference. We must dissent from the apathy. We must dissent from the fear, the hatred, and the mistrust. We must dissent because America can do better. Because America has no choice but to do better. Thank you for watching today. It was an honor to play Thurgood Marshall in the video for you today. I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself to you. My name is Major Attaway. I grew up in Texas in the Fort Worth area. That's where I got started in my career, and it led me all the way to Broadway. And most recently, I was lucky enough to be able to play the genie in Disney's Aladdin. Now, the reason I wanted to talk with you more is to encourage you to continue the work that Justice Marshall started. We know that change is slow. That's one of the many reasons why it's important to get involved in the fight for equality and justice. Your time is your most valuable commodity. I was offered this responsibility because of how I spent my time in order to share with you how Justice Marshall changed history with his. You are actively creating history every moment of the day. And you deserve to empower yourself with the knowledge of the law and empathy for your fellow human being in order to create the world you want to live in. Be the change you want to see in this lifetime, not only because the world aches for it, but because you deserve it. Thank you.